Is Gemara in Kesubos Daf Ches, and we pick it up from the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis. Yesterday we discussed extensively about the Birchas Chasanim. We began yesterday with the first bracha, the Birchas Eirisin, and we learned how you have to have 10 people present by the Birchas Chasanim. And today we're going to delve further into this topic. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom of Zayin Amud Beis, Tanu Rab, Onim Mevarchim Birchas Chasanim Ba'asara, Kol Shiva. All 7 days, what do you need? You need 10 people, and then you'll say the Birchas Chasanim, which we'll see today what they are. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda, born rule, V'sheba'u panim chadashais. You need panim chadashais. Says Rashi, what's panim chadashais? B'chol yoyim sheloi hayu sham etmol. They weren't there. Rashi says literally yesterday. Halacha l'maisa, we're not going to get into right now. It's a lengthy discussion, but it is irrelevant to realize panim chadashais is not a made-up thing. Sometimes, like, yeah, do we have panim chadashais? Do we not have panim chadashais by one of the Shavuot brachas? And people like, whatever. It's a Gemara. The Gemara here teaches us in Zayin Amud Beis in the last line, the only time you're going to say the bracha is if you have this panim chadash, which of course is a level of generating extra simcha. Now says the Gemara, my birchas chasanim, my mavarich, what is the bracha that you make? And just to point out one opinion, as they point out, is other Rishonim, of course, learn, like we all know, that you couldn't have been at the chasana. Amar Rav Yehuda Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. As we turn over to today's daf, Ches Amud Aleph. Sha'akol bara lichvaydai. Bracha number 1, everything was created lichvaydai for his glory. And the second bracha is v'yotzer adam. Baruch Hashem l'keinu melech haolam. You created man. And bracha number 3, v'asher yotza es adam b'tzalmai b'tzelem demus tavnisai. Bracha number 3, Baruch Hashem l'keinu melech haolam. One more time, Yotzer es adam b'tzalmai. You created man in your image. B'tzelem demus tavnisai, in the image of yourself. V'hiskin loy mimenu and you prepared for him a building, a binyan for eternity. Baruch Atah Hashem Yotzer Ha'adam. So bracha number 3, as we see, is a little bit different. It starts with Baruch and it ends with Baruch. And now bracha number 4. Sois tasis v'sagala akara. Sois tasis, we should rejoice v'sagala akara, and the one that's barren, who's in akara, didn't have children yet. But kibbutz banel l'teichas, you gather your children into your simcha b'simcha Baruch Atah Hashem ismech siyan bivanel. And bracha number 4, we realize is unique. It doesn't start with Baruch, but it ends with Baruch. Bracha number 5 also does not start with Baruch. So again, 1, 2, and 3 started with Baruch. 1 and 2 started with Baruch. 3 started and ended with Baruch. 4 just ended with Baruch. 5, as we get up to now in the 6th line of Zayin Amud Aleph, Sameach tesamech re'im ha'uvim. You should be increasingly glad, friends that are beloved, as you were together to Hashem in Gan Eden originally. Baruch Atah Hashem misamech chasan ve'kala. So just like bracha number 4 ended with Baruch, did not start, bracha number 5 ends with Baruch but does not begin. And number 6, which is the final bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bara sasayin v'simcha chasan ve'kala. Says the final bracha, we start with Baruch this time. Again, let's just get this last time, we'll point this out. 5 and 4 only ended with Baruch. 3 started and ended. 2 just started. 1 just started. And now number 6 starts and ends. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher bara sasayin v'simcha chasan ve'kala. Gilarina, ditza v'chedva, joy and gladness. The chasan and the kala, there's songs and their pleasure and there's delight. Ava v'achva v'shalom v'reyos. Love, brother, peace, companionship. Meheira Hashem Elokeinu. And of course now, we almost end over the tefillah that speedily Hashem our God Yishma B'Ari Yehuda should be heard in the streets of Yehuda b'chutzais Yerushalayim, and on the streets of Yerushalayim kol sasen v'kol simcha, the sound of rejoicing and the sound of simcha, kol chasen v'kol kala, the voice of the chasen and kala, kol mitzalois chasanim, the voice of the chasen's incredible happiness mechubasam from their chuppah, una'arim mishtei neginasam, and the children from their incredible parties neginasam Baruch Atah Hashem misamech chasan Im HaKala, who blesses the Chasan with the Kala. And that is the 6 brachas, as you see over here, a very, very lengthy Rashi, and that Rashi is really pointing out, as we just said, we'll just look at one line of Rashi, we don't have time for the whole thing, but Rashi over here in the first narrow line says, Visha Seder Maschel Ba'asher Yotzel Afikach Pasal Ba'Babarach V'Chas Ba'Babarach Kedar Kol Rashi Sidrei Brachos. The Rashi was talking about the third bracha, and then Rashi goes into Saistasis and Asher Bara, and but Shakol Bara is different. Again, that is Rashi, which we don't have time to delve into right now. But the Gemara now says, there are different minhagim about these brachos. Levi Ikla Lebi Rebbe B'Hilula. Levi went to the house of Rebbe during the chasna of whom? The Rav Shimon Berei, of Rav Shimon, who was Rebbe's son. Baruch Chamesh, he only said 5 brachos. Rav Asi Globei, Rav Ashi Bilula the Mar Berei of Mari's son, and Baruch Shis, he said 6 brachos. So we have an interesting machlokes. We just listed 6 brachos, and we said, but Levi witnessed that there are only 5, and what did they leave out? Says Rashi, Yotzer Adam, whereas it says the Gemara's second story, that Rav Asi witnessed that they said 6. Says the Gemara, what's the machlok? It's lame about kamifligi. The Mar Savar Chadi Yitzir Havay, Mar Savar Shtei Yitzir Havay. So we're having a machlok is whether we say the bracha of Yotzer Ha'adam. So seemingly says the machlok, says the Gemara, you know what this debate is? Whether the creation of man was singular, Chadi Yitzir Havay, it was one time, or were there Shtei Yitzir Havay, 2 portions to the creation of man? And Rashi over here, we must see, Rashi is towards the bottom of the Amud. Let's find it. Rashi over here says, Rashi on the second wide line says Rashi, first of all, Rashi points out that what's the 5? He leaves out Yotzer Adam, and Rashi says, what's Chad Yitzir Avai? On the second end of the second wide line in Rashi. Command Amar and Erevin, we learned this together in Erevin many moons ago, but even as Atzela Pirtz of Shemetchila B'Riyas and Never Shneipar Tzuf and Zachar Mibanav is in the cave of by Achar. How was the original creation of man of Adam and Chava? Says the one opinion, it was one creation, it was 2 sides. Adam and Chava were 2 sides, and then Hashem split them in the middle, now we had 2 people. Or Shtei Yitzir's Havai, how could that be? That Adam had a zanav, had a tail, and from that tail, was created Chava. So back into the Gemara, says the Gemara, seemingly, is that the machlokes? Says Gemara, the Kuli Alma Chadi Yitzir Avai. Everyone agrees that they were created in one. There was Adam and Chava on 2 sides, and split down the middle. Mars of a basar machshava azlinan, Mars of a basar maisa azlinan. And the question is, do we go after the machshava, the thought process of Hashem, or do we go after the actual action of Hashem? And the Gemara explains, Rav Yehuda Ramiksiv. Rav Yehuda asked the following contradiction. And this is what we learned together, Gemara and Erevin, that says over here in Daf Yomi. What was the contradiction? One pasuk says, "Yivra Elokim es Adam b'Tzalmai." The pasuk says, "And Hashem created Adam in His image." Singular. Seemingly points out that there was one creation of Adam and Chava together. Uksev, and there's a second pasuk that says, "Zachar nekeva baram," that Hashem created male and female in the plural. So what does that mean? Was it singular or was it plural? Was it one creation, 2 sides, split it down the middle, or was it 2 different creations? And on this, explains Rabbi Yehuda, again, whatever this means, and went up, Hashem thought, his original thought process was, to create them in 2, in the end, Nivra Echad, he created them in 1. Again, difficult to understand. What does that mean that Hashem had a machshava and then he changed his mind? But that is where the 2 opinions come from, and that is the machlokes between the 2 practices that we saw. Whether you say the bracha of Yotzer Adam, of course we do. Says the Gemara, a few more stories. Rav Ashi Ikla Lebi Rav Kahana. We're about 10 lines from the wide lines right now. Rav Ashi went to the house of Rav Kahana for a chasana, Yomakama Baruch Kulu. On the first day, they said all the brachas. Mikan ve'elach, from then and onward, Iko Panu Chadash is Baruch Kulu Ilai, Afushe Simcha Ba'amu. If there were not Panu Chadashis, it was just an extension, and what would they say? 1 bracha. Mevarech Simcha B'ma'inai. What would they do? They would say Simcha B'ma'inai Ba'asher Bara. They would say Simcha b'ma'inai and Asher Bara, the first and last brachos. They would, I said 1. No, that's not correct. They would say 2 brachos without Panu Chadash. It's a very interesting hanaga, tremendous discussion in the Rishonim on this. But he continued that what was the practice that he witnessed in the house of Rav Kahana, Mishiva Vat Shleishim, from 7 days after a chasna until 30 days after a chasna. Bein Amrlu Machmas Hilula, Bein Amrlu Machmas Milula. If you ever have a party with the chassan and kal, a very common practice after one gets married, he gets together with family and friends. So if you have a party between day 7 and 30, Mevarich, what's the bracha? Hasimcha b'ma'inai. Make 1 bracha of Hasimcha b'ma'inai. If you don't say the bracha of Asher Yotzar Es Ha'adam. You make the bracha simcha b'mayna, but you don't say the bracha of asher bara. Mikan ve'eloch, after day 30, if you again have a party for the chassan and the kala, i'amarlu machmas hilula, if you said we're having this because of the incredible simcha of the chassan and the kala, then mavarish simcha b'mayna. V'loi loi. Ask the Gemara, 1 second. How long does this go? What, 5 years later we have a party because of the chazan and kala? We're still saying the bracha of shasimcha b'maynai. Says the Gemara, Amar Papi Mishmei the Rava Noah Trisa Yarchi Shata, for 12 months. One of the original sources of Shana Rishayna, based upon the pasuk in Devarim, explains the Rishayim that a man is supposed to be together and rejoice with his wife for 1 full year. We know he doesn't go to war if it's the first year of his marriage, etc. Says the Gemara, Imekara Imas. And originally, when do they make these brachas? Now, what does that mean? Let's see Rashi, a very important Rashi over here. Rashi, I'm having a hard time finding. Yeah, Rashi over here in the end of the 5th line, going to the 6th wide line, Rashi says, "Koydem achopa." Before the chuppah, you made a party, a pre-party party. You made a party before the chuppah in anticipation of the wedding. Look at the next Rashi. We're seeing that the Gemara of Rav Kahana is extending this bracha of simcha b'maynai all the way 30 days after the chasana. Now the Gemara is asking before the chasana. If you got together and you had a party for the upcoming wedding, when do you say this bracha as well? Amar Rabba mechirami sayra basinta. Says Rabba on the last narrow line, when they started making the beer in the vat, when they started making the wedding preparations, that is the time that you already have this incredible simcha, and that is the time you're already allowed to make the bracha of simcha b'mayna if you have a party for the chassan and kala. Ask the Gemara, Any, is that true? V'Rabba yasik lemaba mar brei. V'Rabba himself made a shidduch for his son, Abba Mar, that was his name, Brei, his son, Ubarach Mishas Erisin. And he only made this bracha from the time of Erisin, which back then was even before they started making the beer. Before they started the actual chasana preparations, they did the Erisin. And Rav Papa already said the bracha then. Says the Gemara, Sheni Rav Papa Davi Tarich. Rav Papa, you know why? Davi Triach Le. Everything was ready for Rav Papa. He didn't have to start making wedding preparations. He didn't have to start making beer. And that was the reason even earlier when they made the Erisin, they were allowed to say the bracha of Shasimcha b'maynai. Says the Gemara, another story in the second wide line, Ravina Asik Le Brei Bay Rav Chaviva. Rav Chanina made a shidduch for his son into the household of Rav Chaviva, meaning Ravina's son, became engaged to Rav Chaviva's daughter, Ubarach Mishas Erisin. And similarly, he made the bracha in the time of Erisin. And Amar, he explained, why am I making the bracha of Simcha b'maynai all the way back here? Kim le begaved lo hajabehu. Says Rav Vina, you know why? Because I know that the chasana is going to happen. They're not going to back out. But says the Gemara, le yistaya milsa. It wasn't yistaya milsa. It didn't work out. V'haji behu, and unfortunately did not get married. And therefore, maybe you should not have said that bracha. Another story, Rav Dachliva bar Marava Ikleila Bavel. Rav Dachliva bar Marava went to Bavel, and he got up to Sheva brachos. Baruch Shisa Richta, he made 6 long brachas. As we commented on the top of the Amba, that's incorrect. We said only the 3rd one has a baruch before and after, and the first 2 have baruch before. 4 and 5, have a bracha after, and 6 has before and after. And yet, Rav Dachlifa, when he was honored with the Sheva brachas, what did he do? He said Baruch before and after. And says the Gemara, that is not the correct psak halacha. He should not have done that. And another story, Rav Chaviva went to a Bei Mehula, went to a bris milah, and Baruch, and at the bris milah he said Shav Simcha b'maynai. He said the bracha of a Simcha b'maynai, that there's simcha, that there's joy up in heavens. It says the Gemara of say that's also incorrect. You know why? Because they're tired. You know why they're tired? Because they're distracted. They're in distress because the baby has pain, which is very similar to the reason why in Chutzlaretz they don't make the bracha of Shechiyanu by a bris milah. You know why? Because the baby has pain here in Eretz Yisrael, though the minhag is to. Amarav Nachman Amarav Chasanim min haminyan. Now it goes into the Gemara, piggybacking off a sugya that we learned yesterday in Daf Zayin. Yesterday we learned that what? what? You need to have 10 men present in order to say the Sheva Brachos. Says the Gemara, is the Chassan himself part of those 10 men? Says Rav Nachman in the name of Rav, yes. But says Rav Nachman in the name of Rav, in Avelim min Aminyan. We'll have to see what this means. But whenever we need a minion by Avelim, the Avel himself is not one of the 10. Meisvei asked the Gemara, Chasan of Avelim in a minion, a Brisa says, both of them are part of the minion. Ask the Gemara, Masnita Karamas Ali Darav, a statement that we've seen in the past. You're asking a question on Rav from a Brisa? Rav Tana, who Palik. Rav is a Tana, and therefore Rav is allowed to argue in a Brisa. Of course, Rav lived in that transition period between Tanaim and Amarayim, but he had the power to argue in a Brisa. So what's your question? Says the Gemara, Itmar. Omar Rav Yitzchak, Omar Rav Yochanan now. Not Rav. Now it's Rav Yochanan says. Chasanim min aminyan, vein avilim min aminyan. Rav Yochanan says that a chasan is part of the minyan by the bracha of chasanim, but an avil, a mourner, is not part of the minyan, which we'll see what exactly that means in a moment. Meisvei asked the Gemara, the same question we said before, Chasan of avilim min aminyan. So a question on Rav Yochanan and the Gemara now does not answer the Rav Yochanan Tanu Palig. Answers the Gemara, Kitanya hi bebirchas hamazayin. The Brisa says that by birchas hamazayin, as Rashi says, that in order to have 3 people to say Zimon, that's when the avil is allowed to be part of the 3 people. But Kikam Rav Yochanan, when did Rav Yochanan say that the avil is not part of it? Bishura is by the line. When they make the 2 rows after a levaya, we have the 2 rows and the avil walks through and they say Amakayim. In that situation, you need 10 people and the avil is not part of those 10 people. Ask the Gemara in the second line of Chesem Abeis, the Lahadam Rav Yitzchak Rav Yochanan, Mavarchan Birchas Chasanim Ba'asara, V'Chasanim in Aminyan. Again, when you make the bracha of the Chasanim that we learned all the extensive brachas at the beginning of today's shir, the chasan is part of the minyan. It's a bracha of avilim are by 10. V'in avilim min minyan are not part of the minyan. Bracha b'shura mi'ika. If you're explaining to me that what was this concept that the avil is part or not part of a minyan, if you're explaining to me it's talking about the bracha of the shura, that line, there's no bracha by the shura. So what are you talking about? Says Gemara, you're right. Alakikam Rav Yochanan. When did Rav Yochanan say again that the avil, that the mourner is part of the minyan? Berachava. He's talking about in the street. What does it mean in the street? So Rashi here in the last wide line of the top explains, when they gave him the first meal, when they gave him the Sudas Avara, at that point they would make a bracha. As we learned together in Moed Katan, they made a special bracha when they gave that Suda. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But the only time you have the obligation to give that meal to the mourner and you make that special bracha is only on the first day. You don't do it all 7 days. Answers the Gemara, yes you do. There are cases in which you could have this unique bracha. You could have this sudas havara that's brought to the avil even after day number 1. If you have a new mourner coming to visit the mourner, coming to visit the avil, then they would indeed make this a bracha. Explains the Gemara, and now we have a very interesting story. Then we have a story of Rav Chia bar Abba. Now what happened? Mikri b'nei d'Reish Lakish havai. That Rav Chia bar Abba was the teacher, was the Rebbe of Reish Lakish's child. Havai. Va'amri la masni brei d'Reish Lakish havai. Some say he didn't teach Mikri Chomish, he taught masni. He taught Mishnayis to Reish Lakish's child. Okay, so we have the Rav Chia bar Abba is the Rebbe of the child of Reish Lakish. And what happens, Rachmana litzlan, Shachav lei, the Yenuka, the child of Reish Lakish was nifter. And what happened? Yom HaKama on the first day, Reish Lakish did not go to Rav Chia bar Abba to console him. Lamacha the next day, Dabre li Yehuda bar Nachmani. The next day, Reish Lakish took Rav Yehuda bar Nachmani. Yehuda bar Nachmani was the mouthpiece of Reish Lakish, and they went to Rav Chisda. Mitur Gemana. And I don't know if I said this correctly. Let me say this a little bit better. Again, Rav Chia bar Abba, his own child died. Again, Rav Chia bar Abba is the Rebbe of the son of Reish Lakish. Either he taught him Chumash or he taught him Mishnah. And one time, unfortunately, the son of Rav Chia bar Abba died. So on day number 1, Reish Lakish did not go visit him. On day number 2, he went to visit Rav Chia bar Abba. And who did he take with him? He took with him Yehuda bar Nachmani. And Amar lei, come Ima Milsa. And he told Yehuda bar Nachmani, come and say something. Come say a bit of a hesed kol Kival Yanuka. Say something about this terrible tragedy that the child was nifter. Pasach va'amar, because Rav Yehuda bar Nachmani opened his mouth and he said, Vayar Hashem vayinatz mikas banav. And Hashem saw and he was angered. He's provoked by the anger of his children, Ubenaisav and his daughters. And Dar asked the Gemara, 1 second. Dar sha'avos minatzin like Baruch Hu koyes al b'neihem v'al b'naisehem. And he explained this pasuk. Then Nadar, where the avos, where the fathers provoke Hashem that they do not act correctly, what does Hashem do? Koyes al b'neihem v'al b'naisehem. He gets angry on the children, umeisim geshem kitanim, and they die when they are young. And that is the end of this story, in which the Maturgaman, which the mouthpiece of Reish Lakish, said these interesting words, which the Gemara in a moment is going to come back and say, this does not sound quite comforting. What does that mean? But before we get there, the Gemara has another way of saying over the story. Viga Diyarmi, there was another way to say the story. That Bachar Have, that the son of Rechia bar Abba wasn't a child, he was a young man. Vachi Kamarle. And this is what the mouthpiece, the spokesperson of Reish Lakish, Yehuda bar Nachmani, said. Al Kain al Bachurav leYismach Hashem. With regarding to the young man, Hashem does not rejoice. And Hashem does not take pity on the orphan and the widows. Why not? For they are all hypocritical, and they're all evil. And their mouth speaks disgusting stuff. And despite all of this, beside all the terrible things that happened to Klal Yisrael, Hashem's anger has not subsided, and his hand is still outstretched. So that's the end, two different versions of what this Maturgaman, what this mouthpiece of Reish Lakish said in comfort to Rav Chia bar Abba. Before we get into the actual story, says the Gemara, what's the meaning of the end of this? Says the Gemara, you know what this refers to? This refers to Kala, everyone knows Kala Manichzul Chuppah. Everyone knows Chassan and Kala, bride and groom, everyone knows what they're doing the first night. Ella, anyone, and this is such an important rule, sometimes you might know what's going on, but it's still nevala, it's disgusting talk. Anyone that dirties their mouth, and they say disgusting things, they talk about what happens on the first night of the chasana. They might be incredible people, and they have 70 years decreed of goodness for them. Nefach alav l'ra. It's going to be turned upon them for bad. That is the end of this pasuk. And that is an interesting story that we just saw again with the Miturgma of Yehuda bar Nachmani of Reish Lakish trying to comfort Rav Chia bar Abba. Says the Gemara, 1 second, slow down. Also Nachmani, this Yehuda bar Nachmani, seemingly he's a wonderful talker. He's giving a beautiful hesped. He's causing Rav Chia bar Abba pain. It sounds like he was bad. Answers the Gemara, Hachi Kamarle, this is what Yehuda bar Nachmani meant. He was telling Rav Chia bar Abba, Choshivat, he was telling Rav Chia bar Abba, you are so great. La'atfuse adara. It's true, it's an incredible tzara, it's an incredible calamity that your child died. But you should know what the reason is, because you, Rav Chia bar Abba, is so incredible that you were seized because of the avirus of the generation. That was the comfort that he was giving to him. And now we go back to the story. Amar Leis, Reish Lakish says, he tells Yehuda bar Nachmani, say something about the greatness of Hashem. He begins and he says, the bracha, what bracha? And this is why we brought down this whole story. He started saying the bracha of the Avelim, which the Gemara is bringing a raya to show that even though it was the second day of mourning, if it's a Panim Chadash, it's the first time you're visiting the Aval, you could say the bracha of Avelim. And Yehuda bar Nachmani said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, hakel hagadol, the great God, B'raiv Gadol in his great vastness. Adir v'chazak, he's mighty and he's strong, B'raiv, Neirais, V'chayim meisim b'ma'amara, he resurrects through his word, he does actions without the comprehension of flies at a misbar and wonderful things without any number. Baruch atah Hashem mechaye hamesim, and that's the raya. But now we go back. We continue in the middle of a story over here. Amar Leis, Reish Lakish tells Yehuda bar Nachmani, and again we're on the second day of Shiva. Rav Chia bar Abba is sitting for his son, whether it was a small child or an older child, and Rav Chia bar Abba was the Rebbe of Reish Lakish's son. Amar Lei, Reish Lakish says, Yehuda bar Nachmani, Kamei mamilsik keneged Avelim. Say something about the Avelim. Pasach v'amar achenu hamiyugayin hamaduchayim. So Yehuda bar Nachmani gets up and he says another bracha, and this is the second bracha of the Birchas Avelim. Our brothers, Acheinu Hamiyukayim Uduchayim, you're troubled and you're crushed. Be'evel Azeh, with this matter of mourning, to do Levavchem, put your heart, Lachkar Ezois, delve into the matter, pay attention and examine Zois Yuemedis La'ad, that this occurs all times. Nasevu Mishishim Mebreshis, this is the way of the world. From the sixth day of creations, Rabim Shasu, Rabim Yishtu, many people drank from the cup of death, and many people will drink from the cup of death. Unfortunately, we know there's death in this world. Like they drink earlier, they're going to drink later. My brother, the Bala Nachamois, the master of consolation, referring to Hashem, Yenachem Eschem, he should comfort you. Baruch Menachem Avelim. Now the Gemara says, 1 second. This bracha you just said, Amar Abaya, Rabim Shasu Lema, Rabim Yishtu Lo Lema. You shouldn't say many people will drink. That's bad. You never say such words. Mishta Rishainim Lema, Mishta Achreinim Lo Lema. You shouldn't say many people will be at such an occurrence. You should never say such a thing. Why? Tamar Rav Shimon ben Lakish, important rule. V'chein Tana Mishmei Rav Yossi, we're smack in the middle of the medium-sized lines. Lo Yilum Al Yiftach Adam Pivla Satan. You should never open your mouth up. Never say derogatory and negative things. So why are you saying in the future people will die? In the future this was the drink. Amar Rav Yosef, what's the source for this? Ma'ikara. Where do we see this in a pasuk? Says the pasuk, Hashem left us. We were a little bit left. We were like Sedaim. And what? La'amayra daminu kistoim ayinu la'amayra daminu. Maya haderle. What does the Navi say back in the next pasuk? Shimut var Hashem katzinu Sedaim. Hear the word of Hashem. Hear the word of Hashem. Katzinu Sedaim. And he leaves out the next part of Amayra. So from here we see that one should never open his mouth up and say negative things. And now we go back to the story. Amar Lei and Rish Lakish again. Rish Lakish is talking to Yehuda bar Nachmani, his mouthpiece. Say something to the mourners. My brothers, this is how we're going to conclude. The third bracha he said, the children of Goim Nechasadim, Avinu, Shemer ki yadad zman Hashem yisaves benav achenu, bal hagoyim el yishalem lechem gemulchem. Hashem should repay your loss. Baruch atah mishalem hagamol. Bless Hashem that pays back your loss. Actually, we're not going to stop here. Let's go a little bit further. Amalei kamei milzik and call Yisrael. Now Rish Lakish says, Yehuda bar Nachmani says something for all of Klal Yisrael. Pasuk v'amar riboynai lamim Hashem podav ve'etzel malat oisha. He says, Hashem, enough. Please redeem us, spare us, and deliver us. From the pestilence, the slaughter, the bloodshed, and what else? The Yirakan, the Shnaf, and the Yirakan, the wind blast. All punishments and misfortunes by Islam. Terem Nikram. Before we call out to Hashem, you answer us. Baruch atah oitzer hamagifa. Blessed is you who contains and saps the magifa, and that is the end of the Birchas Avelim. And this is the Gemara concluding. Of course, we don't really do this nowadays, but this is the Gemara concluding that the Birchas Avelim is not only on day number 1, but rather potentially could be all 7 days if you have a panim chadashais that comes to the mourner's house, and that was proven by the story of Rish Lakish and his spokesperson Yehuda bar Nachmani, who's comforting Rav Chia bar Abba on the death of his son or of his older child. And tomorrow we'll pick it up from Ma'ula, which is saying more dinim of Avelim.